Hey everybody, Mark Stiles, not down here at Studio B. I am in my home office, and you'll see two very familiar faces. We've had previous landlord-tenant updates here on the YouTube channel with both attorney Emmanuel Ebot and Ben Cote in the past throughout this wild time that we're dealing with. But what we're here to do today is give you another update. Attorney Ebot and attorney Cote have been fielding a lot of calls from our landlord clients, often simple small business owners, if you will. Those folks that are renting out properties, creating housing for other people in exchange for rent, creates a small business. So what we want to talk about is where everybody is in this situation, this current situation with COVID and all of the guidelines and mandates through the state of Massachusetts, Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and our US government. So what we're going to do right now is I'm going to turn it over to Ben Cote, who's going to outline a historical look at where we are right now over the last 12 months, and then where we sit right now. And then we're going to pass it over to attorney Ebot as to some of the solutions for both landlords and tenants. So Ben, give us an update, please.
Absolutely. So as most landlords already know, 2020 was a very difficult year, in part because of the moratorium that went in effect at a state level. So from April through the end of the year, the state of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts didn't allow evictions to go forward, except in rare exceptions. Since then, there have been two federal moratoria that have gone into effect. One is the CDC moratorium that I think a lot of landlords would be familiar with. It's been around since the end of 2020. That basically says if the tenant is unable to pay, they make under a certain dollar amount per year in income, and they attest to some other things, landlords can't go forward with a non-payment of rent eviction. So if the reason you're evicting the tenant is they can't pay their rent, this prevents that until the order ends. The CARES Act has a similar moratorium. This one is aimed at landlords who have mortgages that are federally backed, and it prevents evictions for non-payment of rent. So just like the CDC moratorium, and this is for 120 days from when it was passed, which was the end of December. So we're looking at about 4 months where you can't go forward with an eviction under that act for non-payment of rent only.
And the federally backed mortgage, that's any Freddie and Fannie Mae loan. So that's a lot of mortgages that are out there.
Correct. But the reason why it's important is some investors that don't have a mortgage, so if they're a cash investor or if they have a commercial loan that isn't federally backed, the moratorium might not apply.
Right.
So the last piece we want to talk about is a law that was passed at the state level. And this was basically requires certain notice go to tenants whenever a notice to quit was served on the tenant. So this only applies for non-payment of rent situations, again, mirroring the federal level. And it requires the landlord to determine if they're a covered dwelling, which is just that federally backed mortgage concept we were talking about before. And it requires that they disclose if there's any agreement between the landlord and the tenant to repay the rent. And it also advises the tenants about rental assistance. It tells them about trial court rules and some other notices. So basically it's a notice that goes with your notice to quit. So those are the statutes that have come into effect. And so what we're seeing is the process, if we want to go forward with a non-payment of rent eviction, the landlord has to serve the attestation that we talked about, that Massachusetts required notice. That gets served with a notice to quit. The notice to quit stays the same like it's always been. If it's a covered dwelling, the notice requirement goes to 30 days instead of the customary 14. That's because of the CARES Act. The landlord must file an affidavit in court saying that whether or not they got a CDC moratorium affidavit from the tenant. If the defendant, if the tenant serves one of those CDC affidavits at any time, you have to notify the court with an updated form, and that would halt the eviction until the end of the CDC order or until the affidavit is no longer true. So in sum, there's a lot more that you have to do.
That is a lot to swallow right there, Ben. And folks, we're here to help and guide. There's a lot of landlords who in the past have, do it yourselfers. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. There's a lot going on right now. And we want to be there to help you out. But Emmanuel, I want to kick it over to you quickly and find out, what are some of our clients saying, those that own properties, that have tenants that aren't paying? What are they saying? How are they feeling about this?
Well, yeah, so most of our clients who are calling us now, as they understand that the original moratorium has now expired, they've actually been calling us throughout the year, last year, each time just trying to get a sense of what can be done. And and Mark, you probably know, but for the folks out there, most of our clients, are not the large real estate conglomerates that own apartment complexes all over the country. Most of our clients maybe own a multifamily and live in one unit, or own a couple. So any disruption in the cash flow of rent coming in puts their investment in jeopardy. Most of them actually have mortgages themselves that they have to pay. So the level of anxiety that they've experienced in the last year, anger, what have you, is at an all-time high. So the calls that we're getting now are, what can we do now that we think the original moratorium has expired? But as Ben just mentioned, it's a failings of different regulations that are out there. So if the advice to the landlord is to move forward, especially if it's for non-payment of rent, we are really going to have to carefully plot out a path to get from where we are now to where the landlord eventually wants to be.
And because we specialize in solutions, we look for these solutions. We're problem solvers. And one of the experience shares that I wanted to have with you all is, back in the day, way back in 2009, 10, 11, we represented a lot of these real estate owners who were then real estate investors, buying distressed properties, buying at foreclosure and at short sales and what have you. And oftentimes when we got to the courtroom steps on an eviction, the advice is, waive it. Waive the outstanding money. They'd be happy to leave. This would be a massive burden off of their shoulders. Let them go. Forgive it. And it was tough conversations, tough negotiations, but that's what finding the middle is. Oftentimes mediation is finding the middle. And oftentimes that was the best solution. And as quickly and early that you can do things like that, maybe that's a solution now. I'll release you from the rent. This might be a huge burden hanging over your customer, your tenant, your guest. And they may be feeling a sense of relief to not have to pay that money back. Maybe that's one solution. It's early. Put it in the budget if you can handle it, but it might not be a solution for you. Another solution is having a manual take you through the court system, which is different now. It's through Zoom, just like this, right? Now there's more hearings set up, and it's a long process, but we can help. We can help. Ben was going to share another solution that's out there that I don't think enough people know about, that it was a required notification as part of the process if you go down that path, to notify them about this. But I think it's also a solution that not a lot of landlords are thinking about for them. There's not any relief package for these small business owners, these real estate owners. We're talking about people, like Emmanuel said, maybe they live in one, rent out the other. Maybe they own 2 or 3, 4 or 5, and they're hoping to retire using the rent and providing housing for people. But if they have mortgages to pay and taxes to pay, I haven't yet seen a relief package for them. But Ben, if you could share a more thorough knowledge of what the RAFT program is in Massachusetts, that would be great.
Sure. So RAFT stands for Residential Assistance for Families in Transition. And this was a program that existed before coronavirus came, but it's helping to bring the two sides together in certain circumstances. So traditionally under RAFT, if there's a court proceeding ongoing, RAFT will step in and pay up to, I believe the threshold is $4,000 of unpaid rent, as long as the landlord agrees to allow the tenant to stay for at least 6 months. Now, if the tenant again fails to pay, that's a new default, and that 6 months obligation is no longer there. But in addition to RAFT, there are some other programs that have gone into effect in response to this emergency. And I've been hearing from colleagues that sometimes they'll pay as much as $10,000 in unpaid rent. So if the landlord has come to the conclusion that they're not able to fit it into the budget, they're not able to say, I'm going to let you out of your obligation if you give me possession back so I can rent to a new tenant. This is an interesting way to solve the issue of cash flow. And it also helps the tenant stay in the apartment, not become homeless, not make the pandemic worse. So in order to find RAFT, you would search for it online, but also you can type in 211 on your phone and you'd be connected with additional resources to understand how that works. So that might be an interesting way to avoid an eviction. The landlord gets paid something and the tenant gets to stay in the apartment.
So you've got options, right? So maybe they have family, they could go in and they'd love to be relieved of the burden of rent. You can research some of these government agencies, not-for-profit agencies, and help stem some of the tide. You can take the process into litigation, but as we said, going forward for non-payment of rent is going to be challenging. So you could forgive the rent now, or you could maybe go down the path with a process without asking for the money, but asking for possession, correct, Ben?
Yeah, that's right. So all of these restrictions apply only to cases that are based on non-payment of rent. So there's really 3 types of evictions in Mass, very at a broad level. If they don't pay their rent, that's a default and you can seek possession and damages. If they're in default of the lease for some other term, so if they destroy the place or they're breaching the other terms of the lease, and then there's a no fault eviction. So the only one that is prevented under these statutes are the non-payment cases. And the interesting part about a summary process case is there's a concept called a compulsory claim, and there are no compulsory claims in summary process. So even if you sue for a no fault eviction, so it's the end of their lease, they don't have a right to extend, they get 30 days notice, it's not because they're not paying rent. Even if there is unpaid rent, you should be able to go and collect that on a separate lawsuit after you get possession of the property. So there is an option where you're not necessarily saying, I'm going to just write this off and never be paid. You just might have to wait to get that judgment until you get possession back so that it doesn't become a non-payment case.
So there are options, and what we're trying to let you all know right now is that we can help. And some of you may wait too long, and that is not a good strategy. We always try to have our clients be proactive so that they're not forced to be reactive, right? So we don't want to get it to a point where you find yourself in trouble with your mortgage company. But if you do, there's other solutions for that as well. And if you have a multi-family home, Emmanuel, I mean, to hedge some of your downside risk, we did a video on it, right?
Yeah, that's right. So as you mentioned, when our clients call us, we try to lay out all of the solutions, whether it's litigation, as we talked about, the RAFT assistance that we talked, one of the tools that we also recommend for certain clients that own multifamilies and have the wherewithal to divest is to convert them into condos. Because if you have, for example, a 3-family and you are renting a couple of them out, one is not paying rent as a result of the pandemic. In order to kind of shore up that hit that you took, you could convert it to condos and sell one of them off to kind of supplement that lost income. So it doesn't work for everyone, but depending on your situation, that could be something that might appeal to you. And as you mentioned, we did a video that outlined when and how one can convert their multifamily into condominiums.
It's a great video, and we got into it. We went pretty deep with that, Emmanuel, and that's on our YouTube channel. And then there's always the option to sell. And again, in an appreciating market, a crazy imbalance of supply and demand, now is better than 12 months from now of not making mortgage payments. You do have a hostile tenant that you would probably want to disclose. You would want to disclose if that person is hostile, but there are people that are willing to take on that obligation who understand what is going on with the current state of affairs and can handle that. Folks, I really hope you appreciate this. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy the content, please share it with everyone and anyone, and we are here to help. Our phone number is 781-319-1900, and you can reach both Emmanuel Ebot and Ben Cote through our concierge. Thank you and be well.